Hello everyone, how's it going? I am WoWcrendor and welcome back to another episode of Fishing with Crendor. I believe we're on episode 40 right now. I can never remember which one it is. But today is kind of a crazy day because we've actually got one of the old WoW, classic WoW, vanilla WoW, whatever you want to call it, developers on the original game. So please welcome John Staats.
Hi everybody, how you doing? I thanks for having me here, Crendor. This is pretty special. We're in Booty Bay, I see.
Yep, we are in Booty Bay, and you wanted to fish in Booty Bay, pretty much because you said you designed all of Booty Bay.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I built for the game, and I also like the Stranglethorn fishing tournament. That was always a a fun event. So yeah, I like this area. It's also lush. My two favorite areas are I like Stranglethorn and Ungoro Crater for my favorite WoW zones, but that's typical. People generally like the green zones.
Yeah, I know all my favorites are always the green zones as well.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
like Arathi Highlands I always like too, even though it's kind of a
Oh my
boring
gosh.
zone, but I love
Okay, I changed
Arathi.
my mind. That's also my favorite zone.
So before we really get into it, why don't you just tell everybody like what was your position at Blizzard and kind of what did you do?
I was the first level designer the company ever hired from outside. They traditionally hired people from QA because they had a lot of RTSs where the level design was more scripting. So when I was a 3D level designer, which is a whole different animal, and they kind of didn't really know what to do with me. So it was like during the interview, I could tell they were like pumping me for information and trying to like, so how would you go about placing an object, and they just like asked me very generic pipeline stuff. So it was actually a very comfortable interview. I was actually pretty relaxed. I was, in my wheelhouse. But yeah, they wanted me to solve a whole bunch of 3D problems. Like 3D architecture is pretty much usually the hardest part of an MMO. I've heard this from all the other MMOs. Like getting dungeons working, getting cities and buildings is a tough job to do technically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they expected me to solve a whole bunch of issues, but once I came to the project, I would ask questions like, "Okay, so this is great. How many people are in a party? We don't know. Well, how big will the camera be how far back will the camera be following them? Like the chase camera?"
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Well, we don't know that either." "And do you want linear or non-linear?" "Oh, we don't know that either." "How many monsters will you be fighting?" "Oh, well, we don't know that either." So they basically didn't know. There's a lot of
Yeah.
things, and that's actually the right way, because until you actually test it, you can't answer anything. So I wasn't able to answer a whole lot of questions either. But yeah, they welcomed me with open arms.
So how did you actually get into doing 3D model design and all this? Like, did you just one day be like, hey, I want to do this? Or like, did you grow up playing video games and then you wanted to go into that? Or how'd you really get into it?
I actually got into it. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was my game of choice. I was a big tabletop fan. I would just make a whole bunch of homemade modules because my players, they'd buy a module and then they'd read it. They'd get bored.
Mhm.
They didn't want to wait to actually start playing, so they would just read it, and I can't play that one, so I had to make my own modules to stop these guys from reading spoilers. And so that's how I learned how to make immersive environments. And when I learned, boy, I wasn't much of a gamer. I was a Macintosh person because I was a graphic designer. I was in New York City advertising for 10 years, and one of my roommates was he was the PC gamer. I'd played, Doom and Quake and Civilization, all whatever they had on their machine. That's
Yeah.
they'd have to kick me off of their PC whenever they'd come home. I'd say, "Oh, just one more turn,
Just one more turn."
And when I saw that he had bought, one of my roommates, Seth, had bought Scoopaware, they called it, where they would just scoop a bunch of tools and games and stuff for free on the internet. They'd put it on a CD and they'd just put it on the shelf in CompUSA. And he bought this thing and he found a 3D level editor, and it was for Quake. Yes, it was for Quake. And he was also a dungeon master and also authored his own modules. And he says, "John, we can build our own modules and run around in our own dungeons. How cool is this?" He was building his own castle. And the next day, that was at night. The next day, I remember it was a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. The store opened. I was there at the doors, bought the most expensive system I could find. And that was my first introduction to owning a PC. And it was expressly to build dungeons. And I never looked back since, so.
That's so cool. That's like, you're almost like a big kid playing with Legos or like in a sandbox at that point. Like, is that how you felt?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I was more of a man with a mission. I wanted to build my own, dungeons, my own modules and stuff. Then I learned things like polygon limitations and the light map limitations, that you can only build areas that were so big, that were very, very restricting. You could only, oh my gosh, they were like 400 to 500 polygons or something for the entire room. It was, and so it was too primitive to actually be accurate. So I still enjoyed level design. So I started building Quake maps, and I just got into the mod community and started making capture the flag maps over and over and over for years and years and years. And it was, I'm either all in or I won't touch it, with stuff. I don't dabble with anything. I never dabble. I'm either like, once I got into shooters, I got so good into shooters, none of my friends would play shooters with me.
Yeah.
I got competitive. I don't know what you call being in the top 16 of a national tournament, but I was in the top 16. I could see that I wasn't going to make it past the top 16.
Yeah.
But I was happy to be there. That was my zenith. That's when I actually started really getting into level design. Yeah, I'd play like 16 hours, 14 hours a day, capture the flag before I got into level design. But yeah, it was just my pursuit. That's what I did in my free time.
So when did you find this opening at Blizzard? Were you just like browsing around the internet, or like did a friend tell you about it?
No, actually, I wasn't even looking for jobs. Well, actually, that's not true. I'd been offered a job. Eric Weiss. I'm gonna get his Weissman. I know his Weissman. Eric Weissman or Brian Weissman? I think it's Eric Weissman of Raven. I had asked if I wanted to do scripting. They didn't have a level designer position. He offered me a scripting position, and I turned it down because I wanted to do level design. And then I don't know. And I just kind of stopped. I wanted a stable company. My problem was I was in a gilded cage. I was making good money in ad agencies in New York City, but going to a development starter position was pretty lower. Well, I was making 80 grand in New York, and my first job in Blizzard I made 50 grand. Okay, it was a huge cut in pay. And Blizzard actually paid way less than most first-person shooter games. So that's why it was so hard to hire people to the project. But one of my mod guys said, "Hey, John, there's an opening at Blizzard. You should apply for it." And I said, "Well." My internal thought process was, well, I loved Warcraft, Warcraft 2. I didn't like Diablo. I found it it was just a little bit too easy. I wanted something a little bit more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew it was a stable company and they had a really good reputation, high quality stuff.
Yeah.
So I applied, and they were like, "Yes, yes, let's get you in for an interview right now." Like usually, people will say like, I've had people say that when they apply to Blizzard, they have to wait like 6 months to a year and a half. I mean, just like crazy, like people trying to get into QA. Here I'm trying to apply for a dev position, and they called me like a week or 2 weeks later.
Oh my God.
And it was just like crazy fast. But yeah, they needed level designers, that's for sure.
So okay. So you get hired, and what is the first thing they really have you like work on or design about the game?
Well, I explained to them the process of a level design. We were doing, this is back in 2000. Most of the 3D level development was from first-person shooters. Okay, console games really weren't comparable because they didn't use textures like we were doing. Okay, console games didn't have much of a texture space, so they used a lot of cell-shaded type of stuff, very simple type of textures. So there really weren't many candidates from the console side of things. Plus, consoles paid way more. They earned way more. So it was not likely we were going to get any console applications. But yeah, they pumped me for information. I explained the process, and they started me. I was working in the Quake 3 engine, using Quake 3 BSP editors. It was the least Warcraft-looking stuff you can imagine. Big black light maps, which is a light map is a shadow that's procedurally generated and applied to all the geometry in the level. Okay, so the light map just maps the blackness, and everything is black in these caves and gold mines that I was making. But these were blocky, primitive, blocky structures that you can imagine. Quake 3 wasn't the best with organic. Well, actually, it was better than Quake 2, but I mean, it was just nothing like what the other editors, like a wireframe editor like 3ds Max or Maya, those packages were doing, and they were just pretty butt ugly. They were just not Warcraft looking. Everything had to be orthogonal, parallel, just very rigid. Everything at 90-degree angles. The texturing was on world coordinates, so when you slid a block, the textures would scroll on the block as you would move it. Okay, the idea of mapping a specific texture to the side of the geometry was something you couldn't do. So it was just the most un-Blizzard thing, but it was the only thing we knew. Like all the lessons that we had learned from first-person shooters, that's basically what I did for the first 9 months on the project, is try to apply what the industry understood about 3D level design to an MMO, and we learned, all right, nothing is working. Just nothing is working. And so we scrapped everything. I was working 90-hour weeks easily. I mean, minimum 90-hour weeks. I was kind of a fish out of water in Orange County, so I kind of like, if I'm going to move out of my apartment in New York, I'm going to get a lot of work done. So I was enjoying level design because it was like real finally. It's not just, it's going to be seen by millions of people. So that was just like, it actually, I don't know, that was inspiring to me. And yeah, so we scrapped all that work, and then we started with 3ds Max. But I started gold mines. I did a couple gold mines using BSP editors. We could only look at them with the Quake 3. We would run it like as a death match. I would be looking at my work, and Shane DeBeery, who was one of the producers, we were all networked together. He would just connect to my server, and he would download the map, and he'd appear suddenly with a BFG and start shooting me while I'm looking at the level, and then Mark would jump in, and then Mark Kern would jump in, and then we'd all start. People would hear that there's like a death match going on in this level that I was just checking out, because we all had the cheat codes. Okay, someone would turn God mode on, and then you can only affect them by knockback. So you could BFG them, into the water and stuff. But I went from a gold mine. I think I did 2 gold mines, and then Karazhan. They wanted to see a real dungeon because, a micro dungeon, like a non-instance dungeon, is fine. We wanted, like, what's the worst case scenario? And so that's where we did Karazhan, where it was originally going to be inhabited by this demon Mal'Ganis, who was there. It had 3 primary towers. There was the mage tower, where it was very magical, a library type of area. Oh boy, I forget what the other. Probably one was a very demon centered tower. Like, these were just like side towers to the main tower. But it was all in BSP. We couldn't even load it into Quake 3. I mean, nothing could compile it. I'd worked on that thing for months and months and months, and we're talking long weeks too, like 90-hour weeks. So this thing, oh my goodness, this file, you couldn't even tell what was going on the way we were working. I can't believe that we were trying that.
You pretty much like designed like a modern dungeon or raid before you even designed something like Wailing Caverns.
Yeah. Well, it was a dungeon, it was a play space, and they couldn't answer anything about dungeons, so you might as well work on a raid. I mean, they could answer the same amount of questions. At least raids could be large, and so I figured there might be more room for error. But it was just utterly, completely unplayable. I mean, just not even close.
So did you have like a moment where you finally designed something and they're like, hey, this is like perfect, like we're going to use this and like let's move forward?
Well, level design in BSPs is pretty painful anyway. Like when I was doing mod stuff, I would do like, I'd go to sleep and start the compile, and by the time I'd wake up, the compile would be over. And then I'd look for my mistakes, spend the entire day working, and by 10 o'clock midnight, I would be looking to do another compile for the next night, and that's kind of how I worked. So it was, when it took 40 minutes to load the level, or longer, and when you couldn't really save frequently because of it took, I don't know, 20 minutes to save, like when it crashed, and it did crash, it was pretty grim. And the producers would they're the ones who are in charge of the schedules. They do the budgeting and stuff like that. They're not really the bosses of anybody. I mean, like, push comes to shove, they were, but they were just kind of like the keepers of the schedules, and they said, you know what, we're not going to be able to build dungeons this way. There's just no way that it was working. So, and the reason why we went with BSP is because BSP editors, and BSPs, by the way, they're like blocks instead of like a single wireframe mesh that you can like manipulate. You build everything by laying out a whole bunch of blocks. It made supposedly very clean geometry, free of floating point errors, but in our testing, it turned out to be just as messy as 3ds Max geometry. So the programmer said, well, heck, let's just go with 3ds Max, which was the editor that we used to build the rest of the game with. So everything looked the same. They could stream. BSPs couldn't stream, which was a huge deal. Streaming was basically streaming allowed us to build the continent without load screens. So I think we were the first game to be all streaming, which is a huge achievement too. But yeah, it was pretty painful. So the editors, the producers said, let's just switch to 3ds Max.
So what was like the first like zone or actual dungeon you finished? Like, did you make like a zone first, or was it a dungeon that you made that actually is in the game or was in the game for vanilla WoW?
Well, there's a lot of prototyping stuff that didn't go into the game. I did the the first thing that got into the game very first was probably on Karash. It was my first and worst dungeon. It was just, I was trying to model every single little crevice and crease because I was used to BSPs. You know, shadows were how you defined shape, not through textures, really, with BSPs. So the form was a little bit more important. So I just built it the wrong way. And I painted myself in the corner, and I was always just kind of fixing things, iterating on things. Again, it was a raid, and it's actually pretty wholly unsuited for raids. I mean, you got to mount up even to go through the tunnels and stuff. It's just so long. But at the time, you know, the whole EverQuest paradigm was bigger, bigger, bigger. You know, we have to have it big enough that a whole raid there's enough content. But and we didn't know whether or not we were going to do private dungeons, okay, which are instances, okay. We called them private dungeons, and we didn't know whether or not instancing or private dungeons was going to be a thing. So to be safe, we just made everything as, you know, there's no such thing as a dungeon too big, was the credo. I swear to God. And when in doubt, make it bigger. Those are the two credos.
Oh God. So I'm looking at, I brought up like your list of stuff you mentioned, like there's Encourage, Black Fathom Depths, Blackwing Lair, Blackrock Mountain, Blackrock Depths, Booty Bay, Hair's End, Lochmadon, Lower Blackrock Spire, Molten Core, RFD, RFK, Skullman, Slag Pit, Upper Blackrock Spire, Wailing Caverns, Warsong Gulch. So pretty much like everything.
Yeah, well, it's about half of the instance dungeons. Let's see, the shipwrecks, or I did the shipwrecks and the transport ship, the Zeppelin, that type of stuff. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I just loved it. I love building stuff, and they weren't going to hold me back. So yeah.
Was this like something where the more you did it, the better you got at it? Like obviously AQ was your first one, but like
without a doubt. Let me tell you something. I had I don't know if the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours to become like a master of something. I had that before I came to Blizzard. My first levels were so bad. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Sorry about that. I believe I forget what the question was.
So yeah, pretty much like getting better through time.
Oh, yeah. Oh no, without a doubt, you get better. I don't know if you know Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours to become an expert at anything. He good book, by the way. I think it's called Outliers. Yeah. Anyway, to be an expert at something, I had 10,000 hours of level design before I even came to Blizzard, and that was all by myself. You know, with the mod group. The first levels for years and years, you're looking at your stuff and you just don't realize that it's awful. You just don't realize how bad it is because it's so hard. The learning curve at the time for BSP editors especially, they were very inflexible structures. A lot easier with 3ds Max, but no, it takes a lot of time. 3ds Max is a much faster curve. I had all the processes down for developing environments from Dungeons and Dragons, although that didn't really help you technically. But yeah, you learn as you go, and yeah, you make all your mistakes on your first dungeons.
So I'm kind of curious, like, what were those dungeons that even made it into the game? Because obviously, even having played Vanilla WoW Classic WoW, there are some dungeons that feel a lot worse than some of the other ones.
Well, it's kind of funny. We didn't know, like, let's see. I think the Scarlet Monastery was built, like, we had this fear of like, you'll see it a couple of times. Okay, Aaron Keller built the Scarlet Monastery. He also built the inn, the human inn, and you notice that there's like this little L-shaped entrance in the human inn, and at least in vanilla WoW, I don't know if they've rebuilt it. They I hope, but it was just so that you're not looking straight into the inn. It in first-person shooters, you build these little elbows to prevent people from the outside seeing in and the inside seeing out, just for frame rate purposes. We had no idea at all what was going to be good frame rate or ret. When I built Booty Bay, it was a huge win for the team, because we had previously, like when Aaron Keller built Stormwind, it was all portaled, and what that means is that all the buildings are just like, they're like facades. You know, they're just the front of the building, and it's treated like it's an interior where, boy, it's kind of hard to describe. When you're on one side of the city and you're looking across the city, it doesn't draw the whole city. There's parts of the city that drop out, and that's just because we're worried about drawing the whole city. And when you visualize the whole city on your screen, it slows down your frame rate. And that's one thing all Blizzard games, they owe a lot of their success, is that they're popular because they build games for low-end systems. Yes, they're good for casual players, but they're also good for casual machines. And that's why WoW's engine was so revolutionary, is that we built something for the casual machine. A lot of people don't appreciate that. A lot of developers appreciate it, but not a lot of fans don't really realize that was a pretty big technological achievement.
Yeah,
I mean,
getting
really
people to actually play the game on their computer, because obviously, like at that time, especially the early to mid 2000s, not many people had like a computer that could run like a big game or anything like that.
Right. And you know, our engine was just so crazy, but you know, we built stuff like we had really low polygon work in some of our dungeons, because well, one, we've got different level designers working on it. A couple artists came over, they just translated over to building 3D objects. It's a different way of building. When you're building, say, an object, a chair or a bush or a tree, from the perspective, you're orbiting around that object, tweaking the vertices, pushing the polys, you know, applying texture. So your camera view is from the outside of the object. When you're a level designer, your camera is inside the object, looking out, like looking at this thing that's around you. Okay. So it's a really different way of working. So you have to kind of train yourself to you know, like when you make that jump. So yeah, so everyone came from different backgrounds. So yeah, the dungeons didn't always hold together, but yeah, we had an art director that kind of did his best to keep everybody on the same page.
What would you say is your least favorite dungeon that you designed?
Definitely Ankarash. Ankarash was just, I was just always on the edge. I tried so many different things. When I did the temple part of Ankarash, I went through great pains to make this. I built it like in Riven. There's this gold orb building that's very iconic from Riven. This Cyan game. It was a puzzle game, and they had this big globe dome that had the slice cut right through it, and it was just really an interesting shape. And I wanted to do that with Ankarash Temple, but I did two slices so that from the top view it looked like a scarab, and like the letter T, almost like cut through a circle. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing. It was pseudo Egyptian, you know, but not explicitly hieroglyphics type of full on, you know, Karnak Egyptian type of flair. So I liked that idea. but I had no idea what players, how they would see the temple. I didn't know how far the camera was going to be away from them, um, because no one wants to commit to any, like the designers didn't want to commit to anything until they could test it in game, and we couldn't actually build it until we knew like how to build. So there's like this standoff of so what we gradually build it, but like that's perfect case. I went through these huge pains of cutting these through the temple, and the problem with that was that it interrupts the layout of the temple. Okay, you've got this, you can't connect this room on the south side to the north side because there's this wedge just cut right through the temple, and just a lot of ideas that right now are just kind of stupid sounding.
Yeah.
That well, I mean, we didn't know, what the game was like, the gameplay. We didn't know, what it was gonna turn out to be. So yeah, all my mistakes were pretty much made on Ankarash, and then I think I went to Booty Bay and then started on Wailing Caverns was my next one. And again, Wailing Caverns was just so big.
Mm-hmm.
And my big problem with that is, okay, I built Wailing Caverns. Okay, I said done. Okay, I built
Right.
this cave that has a big center room. Okay, that was the final boss room. Okay, and Alan Adham was the founder of the company and the lead designer. He says, "Oh, this looks great, John. Boy, really convincing. Oh, it's gorgeous. The textures. Oh, everything's gorgeous." And he says, "Let's put the instance over here." And he moves the instance line to the very farthest edge of. He says, "Well, now that's when the dungeon begins." This is after, like, I don't know, 2 months worth of work.
Yeah.
Like, well, why wouldn't you just put the instance line in the front of the dungeon?
Yeah.
Like once you go inside. And Alan was kind of like really the only senior designer on the team, so there was no one really there to really challenge them as much. But he said he wanted the dungeon to have give a little flavor of the area. And again, it's a EverQuest type of trope where the idea was to kill a bunch of we call them plus mobs. I guess they're elite mobs.
Mm-hmm.
You killed a bunch of plus mobs, and they are too tough for one player to take down. So because they're so tough, it put an incentive to players to group up and kill them. And this would naturally form a group of people that when they get enough people, they can then go into the dungeon. It's a very social type of experience.
Mm-hmm.
That was the theory, and it's based on the paradigm of EverQuest. So
So
didn't work out that way.
Yeah. Did
Yeah.
you at that time have did anyone have the idea of like, hey, we're gonna have 5-man parties or 10-man parties or whatever? Or was that just like, hey, we're just gonna encourage people to group up?
No, I don't think there was a limit to parties in EverQuest, and I think Dark Age of Camelot had 8 when it came out. That was the size of a party. I'm pretty sure that was it, but it was something around 8. Maybe that was too many. A lot of the classes were redundant in Dark Age of Camelot. They were very similar. So yeah, we got away with 5. But there's like this kind of there's kind of a balance. The smaller the group, the less you can count on a specific class to be in that group. And if you can't count on I don't know, if you can't count on a tank, a real good tank, or a real good healer class, or the right DPS, you couldn't use specific class mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the raid fights were a lot more interesting because you could always count. If you got 40 people going, there's going to be a mage. There's always going to be a warrior. There's going to be specific. And then you could do specific things that were tailored to those classes and let people really use their class mechanics. You couldn't do that with 5-man dungeons. I remember Skullomance trying over and over and over to try to do it without a priest, because we didn't. We needed shackles for one of
Oh yeah.
the undeads. Without undead shackles, there. Oh, I hated it. We must have wiped like 10 times. We could not do it. I was a druid trying to. I was training one of instead of shackles. What I would do is I would just draw aggro and just kite the thing around that atrium. It was just crazy, but oh my gosh! But yeah, Wailing Caverns was probably and still huge mistakes in Wailing Caverns. I didn't know if mazes were gonna be
The
fun.
jump.
The jump, people
Yep.
love the jump, and it was easier. It was easy to do the jump with us because we're looking at this level, and we're playing locally. We've
Hmm.
got ridiculous internet connections. Seemed like the simplest jump in the world, but it caused so many problems for people who were playing for real, when they're playing in the Midwest or on the East Coast, uh, anywhere. Uh, the latency makes it so much harder.
And I guess that's just like a learning experience too. Like you don't even think about it until the game's live and people are
Yeah,
playing it and doing that.
yeah, and it's also it's an experimental process. Like that's your natural, and that's just not a level designer doing that. Uh, Animators experimented with stuff. Everybody experimented with stuff because it takes so long to work on something, um, that you kind of, your mind just drifts around and you go, oh, what if I did this? Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Do you think that's why the game is a little more streamlined now? Like speaking of the classes and stuff, is because now that you do have 5 mans and like you can easily LFG and pug up and stuff that they
Yeah.
had to do that because they're like, oh, we need a rogue specifically for this dungeon.
Right. Well, yeah, like all the classes are they're all pretty much hybrids. Like starting out, they were very RPG, where you
Mm.
had to have a tank. Like you had to have this class. You had to have a specific dedicated healer, or you just weren't going to. There was no hybrid classes. So, yeah, it started, and that was just how EverQuest did it, how all of them did it, because that's how Dungeons and Dragons did it. They were very role specific. Um, that was a role playing game. You were playing a role, and now they're more action. They're more casual. They're more fun, for at least the moment to moment experience. A lot of people forget how long it took to get a group of 5 people to do a dungeon.
Yep. I
You know,
remember Lower Blackrock Spire was not the most fun thing to put a
I
group
know.
together for.
I've had nightmares there too, and I built the place. I was like, oh my gosh, it was just so long.
Yeah. Is there any dungeon that you really enjoyed making though?
Oh yeah. Well, Lower Blackrock Spire was the fastest that built. I just had this idea of a real. The concept was a very irregular ceiling, just this big cavern. Um, we were so anal retentive about avoiding ledges in the first few dungeons. The original Wailing Caverns really didn't have any ledges. Like the big room was when it stopped. Dead Mines didn't. Um, let's see. Upper Blackrock Spire I built first. No ledges there. That actually ended in the arena. We added the
Mm-hmm.
Beast Room and then the final boss room almost years later. But yeah, we were worried about people falling to their death. That was one thing we didn't want. Blizzard made casual games. You can't have people falling to their
Yeah.
death. And that was just such a bummer because once you get a ledge, man, you can do so many cool things. You can do bridges, you can do all this stuff. So that was Lower Blackrock Spire was when uh, the shackles came off and I could actually do ledges and crazy stuff. So that's kind of how that's why that thing was such a Swiss cheese of that's what Jeff Kaplan called my dungeons, the Swiss cheese. There was a big central chamber that you would wind people around in, and the cool thing with that is that you could reuse uh, the big central chamber over and over at different angles, and it all looked good. You know, you only had to build that central chamber once, and so it wasn't the case where uh, it was just, I don't know. It was cooler once we were able to build with ledges. So
Was there anything that you kind of designed that got shut down by like the higher ups right away? Where you're like, wow, this is really cool, and they're like, no, we don't need that.
no, no one ever did that. If something was cool, the tendency was try to get it into game, and that was true with uh, fight mechanics, items, any systems, anything cool. They tried to get it into game. Like programmers, we had a great engine programmer, Scott Harton. He was an MMO player. He was a hardcore MMO player, so he wanted cool stuff in his MMO, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like when we built rooms that were way beyond spec, he would try to accommodate us. You know, when we built objects that were too big or too complicated, we would try to figure out ways that we could like cheat it or hack it into, like, so it wouldn't kill the frame rate. So um, it wasn't like that. But what I did build, like, there were a few things that I built, but they were so early um, that it just wasn't suitable for gameplay.
What were those?
Dragon Isles is the thing everyone's been asking about. Like, that's the one thing, and it was just the geometry was too primitive. The concept was super. The best thing about Dragon Isles was the concept, just flat out. The concept was amazing.
What actually
Carla,
is the Dragon Isles? Because I don't even know what that is.
okay, so it was a basically the concept was there's four islands that are connected by caves. Believe it or not, caves that go underneath the water. So you go onto land, like almost a channel type of thing. It was the most awkward thing to build
Yeah.
because the monsters are dragons. Okay, and then Metzen made the insistence that the only evil dragon is the black dragon, which kind of annoyed the game designers because you have all these cool dragons, but we can't
Yeah.
fight any of them. I mean,
Yeah.
are you kidding me? How ridiculous is this? But no, that's probably one thing he probably should have relented on, but didn't. And so he stuck to his guns. And so we couldn't have different colored dragons, one on each island. And it was just, and the temples themselves were old god temples. There was a giant squid on top of one. That was from a concept from Carlo Aureliano's. He did such a good. I think it was the cover of the WoW concept art that came with the special edition for original WoW. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was on the cover and it wasn't actually in game, but it was so freaking cool. It's this big Nautilus with a building on top of the giant Nautilus,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, I built it, but that building, as big as it wasn't big enough for a raid. So that was one main reason why it was canceled. There were just so many things working against it. Yeah, so
Mm.
it'll never be done.
Did you I'm kind of curious, did you ever even work on like a guild housing type of things? I know everybody's always like, "Oh, I want guild housing or player housing," but like was that ever like
Oh
talked about
yeah,
or planned?
absolutely. We were constantly talking about it, but no one could figure out what kind of gameplay would go into it. So I came up with an idea of real world real estate where people would I wanted any excuse to build castles. Okay, I love castles, and Aaron Keller got Shadowfang, which, oh, I wanted to do Shadowfang, but I was doing like other things that I also wanted to do. So um, he did Shadowfang, did a great job on it. Um, but that was basically the only castle really that we really had.
Yeah.
Stormwind Keep wasn't a castle. It was basically, there wasn't an exterior to
Mm-hmm.
Stormwind Keep really, other than just kind of this facade. So um, I wanted guilds to like fight over castles. Like the first guild to take down, a Nixia or a Ragnaros would get points, or there'd be PvP events. It was, of course, typical. My ideas were all these big grandiose ideas that we had no engineering time to pull off, that required a whole bunch of one-off features that couldn't be applied to anything else. But I mean, they were cool ideas, but you'd need a whole nother dev team to actually pull any of them off. And that's the discipline that a lot of people don't realize, is that you have to work with the assets that you have. Eric Dodds, to me, is like the perfect game designer who can work with, the mechanics that are given. He did all the trade skills, and they all used the same interface, same objects, same functionality. Mining is the same thing as herbalism. Skinning was kind of a one-off thing, and fishing was a one-off thing. Those are the only two really unique things for trade skills. But look how much legs he got off of trade skills. I mean, that's one designer doing everything, which was just insane. That was a typical, vanilla WoW insane, goals. But I had this idea of componented castles, so that as your guild takes over, like the castle in front of, let's say, Stormwind, or in Elwyn, primo real estate, the best castle. They'd have their banner out front. And as they would level up their castle, they'd have turrets. They'd have a better drawbridge. They'd have a better, this or that, the other thing that wouldn't actually affect the footprint of the playable space. So I did a test of, I think, Orc and Human, and Alan Adham loved it. But again, this is one of those things where we just didn't have the engineering time. We couldn't get PvP in the game. I mean, forget about a PvP system. So,
so speaking of PvP, like, what was the first PvP thing that you had to work on?
Well, had to work on. Let's see. That's a very okay. Warsong Gulch is what I got into the game, and it was something that Matt Malizia, he's working at Frostkeep Studios now. He's making a game called Rend. He's the CEO, and he was a new artist on the team. He just started making a PvP zone, or a PvP zone by himself. Just taught himself how to use. And he was he was an artist. He would make props, the doodads as we called them. That he just picked up the level editor and started playing around with it. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he says, "Oh, just trying to figure stuff out, trying to make a smaller map, because Alterac Valley was just so big. It was just too hard to test." And so we wanted something smaller. So we just made it up ourselves. No one else knew that we were working on it. We did this at night and on weekends, and we just presented it and said, "Hey, what do you think?" and that's how you ninja things into the game. You do it in your own time. Okay. They can't yell at you for like wasting time. Mm-hmm. And you give anything to the designers, and the designers are always starved for any type of assets. They want new textures, they want new art, new objects, new monsters, anything, because the designers can't do that. All they can do is script stuff together. So they're kind of like, they're helpless. And you can like force their hand by making these cool things and say, well, if you want these awesome toys, they're here if you want, so that's kind of that's like the secret. That's the secret to being a true ninja. And so you have plausible deniability. Well, I'm not actually putting it in the game myself. The designer has to put it into the game. And so it's really the designer's job to sell it to the producers, and they're pretty good salespeople. So that's kind of how Warsong Gulch got even made. I mean, Captured Flag was never on the table as far as PvP. Oh my gosh, I did a Rocket Arena attempt.
Rocket Arena.
Yeah, like this whole one-off type of idea where it's just, let's do the last man standing or type of, but it didn't work with teams because WoW everybody was with healing, and it wasn't as deadly as Quake. Like one person could just, if they attack two people from behind, bam, bam, you kill them both.
Yeah.
Right? You get to hit two people at once with a railgun. Just and it happens in a blink of an eye. Like in WoW, it's like, okay, I'm gonna debuff you now. Okay, now I've got my rolling dots on you. Okay, now I'm gonna, it takes forever. And when you've got 3 people versus 3 people, no one even cares about the geometry at all. It's just, your assist targeting and, your healing. Maybe you can counterspell, but it was no one cared about the arena. So that's what happened to Rocket Arena. No one cared.
Were there any other, like you were mentioning how you do something in your off time and kind of sneak it in? Were there any other things you did like that?
Oh yeah, that was basically my role on the team. I mean, I worked longer hours than anyone on the team, so it kind of made me like, it kind of shielded me from like criticism when I stepped on people's toes, because that's kind of how I work. I mean, it's just, I see something and I start chasing after it. And so yeah, pretty much everything. The micro dungeons were probably my biggest contribution. Micro dungeons were the non-instance dungeons that weren't instanced. The caves, the gold mines, the hives, the shipwrecks. There's shipwrecks all along the shores. Just shipwreck, and that was just me doing stuff on weekends and late at night. Just because I hated the idea of regurgitating a layout over and over again. When we tested Coldridge Valley, I think it was, the starting zone for the dwarves. They had the same micro dungeon over and over. We had 4 dungeons. They were all the same layout. And it's just sucked. I mean, I just hated the idea that, I know I turn left as soon as I go inside. Even before I go into that, I turn left and then I go, there's a ledge, and I jump down the ledge, and that same layout would appear 4 different times in the same zone. That was the plan for the entire world. Like 2 gold mines for the entire world, 2 caves for the entire world.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was the budget. I mean,
it
wasn't because people didn't care about dungeons or layouts. That was just the budget. Although some people didn't care about layouts, they didn't think it was a big deal until we played it. And then once we played it, people said, "Oh, all that noise that John has been making for the past year, I see what he's saying now. Yeah, this kind of sucks." And so, because I'd been making so much noise, the producers kind of gave me the license to make my own content. And as long as I could knock stuff off of my task list, I had a task list of, you have to do a dungeon every, I don't know how many, months or whatever. As long as I could get my own work done, then yes. And as long as I wasn't creating work for other people. But because they knew I was working crazy hours, they'd start working on it in their own time as well to get this cool new thing in the game. And so it kind of like snowballed, where like a lot of cool stuff got in the game. So that's probably my biggest influence, was getting unique, 15 mountain caves. I think I did over a dozen gold mines. I mean, there were gold mines that weren't even used, like the Blasted Lands, or just often, we didn't need them, so let's see, I got the, once the micros were done, like then I did, I ninja'd a lot of stuff, and I redid the dam. The dam looked more like a bridge. Dams are usually as high as the water level, kinda, on one side. That's kind of how a dam works. And then the other side has this huge drop off. Well, the dam used to have this like huge wall. It was like keeping out King Kong, and I'm talking from Loch Modan. You couldn't even see the wetlands. It was just so high. So I kind of rebuilt that, and I rebuilt the slag pits. That was probably my favorite ninja job. Was we had a bunch of orc watchtowers from Stranglethorn and all this Booty Bay type of stuff. They're very yellow bleached, sun bleached wood that didn't belong in the Syrian Gorge at all. And so I reused the textures from the Dark Iron Dwarves. Brian Morrisroe was he was a texture artist for WoW. That's how he started. He went on to being the art director for Diablo. He started out painting textures for dungeons. He's very good at it. His first one was Shadowfang, and he painted so many for Blackrock Spire. That's why there's so much Blackrock Spire stuff. So I had so many textures to work with. Oh, it's wonderful. But I reuse those for very creatively, like for a great texture, like a oh gee, I don't know, like an iron grate type of scaffolding type of texture that was meant for the floor. I would roll that up in a ball and use that for barbed wire, like a roll of barbed wire. It had the same effect. So I did that, and I reused like all the mines out in the slag pits over Syrian Gorge. All replaced a bunch of orc towers, which just didn't. Oh, they were an eyesore. That's the one thing I would love to have more than anything. If my book had anything, that's the one thing I'd love to have. An earlier picture of the slag pits before the Dark Iron Dwarf textures got in there.
Oh, yeah, that'd be an interesting thing to see. That's like just lost to the abyss at this point.
Yeah.
Speaking of just like that area, I know Blackrock Mountain it's like the first big raid everybody does, because it's got Molten Core, it's got even like this Blackrock Spire, so you spend a lot of time there. I really like how the center of it is like that big kind of structure, and then all the chains are like attached to it with the dwarves. I always thought that was like really cool how the dwarves are like holding onto it with the chain, but it was always kind of annoying to navigate around that.
Yeah, that room was my favorite room. I think if there's one thing in WoW, that was my very favorite thing was Blackrock Mountain. Just the original design called for 2 concentric rings that were on different levels. There was a dungeon on each level at opposite sides of the cavern, and in the center was that rock where the architect was buried, but there was suspended bridges over, and yes, it was hanging on chains, but I was thinking, let's get rid of the bridges and use the chains as the bridges. So I thought that was kind of cool, but yeah, that turned out pretty well.
Yeah. So also speaking of things that just don't get used and worked on, what about Hyjal? Because I know obviously everybody's questing, and you see that zone where it's like, oh, this isn't finished yet, or you can't go here, and everyone's like, well, I want to go there.
Yeah, it's Hyjal was, I think that was core into the lore of Warcraft 3. That's where the final fight happened, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That was always going to go into WoW. Then we realized at the tail end of the process that when you make leveling easier, people reach cap level faster, and they don't need to quest in zones. Like, there's only so much loot that you give them once they're level 60. They're on the raid progression. So all these high level zones, it really didn't have a lot of like Silithus wasn't really fleshed out. I mean, Silithus was mostly empty when we shipped.
Yeah.
We just didn't need them. There's only so many slots of items that you could give people. Like, once you've given them an upgrade to, like, when your weapon goes from 58 to 60, that's it. That's other than if you want to do this like inflation game where it's 62, 64, 65, 66, but that's really digging yourself in a hole. So we had just tons and tons of area that we didn't need, and that was Hyjal. We said, well, we're going to have expansions, and we don't want to completely remove people from Azeroth. So that's why it was brought back. I think Quel'Thalos was that the name? I no, Quel'Danos.
Oh
Anyway,
yeah.
above the Eastern Plaguelands,
Mm-hmm.
there's a zone that we just didn't need it. You know, it was just that's why those were left out, I guess, of vanilla.
What about something like old Ironforge? Because I know, obviously,
Oh
like people
yeah.
would blink into there as a
Yep.
mage and like get around, but
Yep.
like, what was that ideally supposed to be?
Well, originally all the capital cities were going to have their own little dungeon, like a little small dungeon. The stockades, that was our experiment with copying and pasting the same room over and over again. Didn't turn out so well. I mean, and again, it's so cramped and it's just, oh my gosh, what a crazy place to battle. Like the ceilings are too low. It's just a weird place.
Mhm.
Hellfire Citadel, I think, was it Hellfire? I can't remember. Hellfire,
Yeah.
the orc one.
Oh, Hellfire Peninsula.
Yeah.
It's
So the old dwarven the old city, the dwarven city. There's the idea of the old. I think it was. I don't know if it came from Seattle, where it's like the buried Seattle, like was buried. I don't know. So there's something to do with Seattle was buried on top of old Seattle, like there was a
mm.
fire or something. But it was just the idea of a city built on top of a city, and of course the old city has got to be haunted. You know that monsters in there. And Aaron was only happy to build, a whole bunch of stuff down there, but again, we were realizing, no, we don't need those dungeons, so we stopped.
What about the airfield there too? What were you gonna do with that?
Is that the one you see from the flight path?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. That. Oh, yeah. Above Ironforge. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just honestly, that's just one of the exterior level designers making that flight a little bit more interesting.
Yeah. I see.
That's all it was. It's just let's just it's kind of liberating when you don't have to worry about gameplay. You can just kind of just do your own thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's what I was with Blackrock Mountain. Did you get any like inspiration from something like Lord of the Rings with Mordor? 'Cause I know
Yes.
everybody always is like, "Oh, Blackrock Mountain, that's like
Yeah.
Mordor."
Oh yeah. Lower Blackrock Spire was actually. Oh, Blackrock. Oh yeah, that was Mordor. Yeah. Okay, so I thought you were talking about um. Oh, jeez. Mines of Moria. Okay.
Oh yeah.
That's okay. Lower Blackrock Spire, Mines of Moria. Yes, but yeah, I mean, there's only if you're going to do, I don't know how many zones, 48 zones, you're going to hit every single trope that you're
Yeah.
going to have. I mean, how many times did we do volcano zones? Oro, every kind of volcano. That's how we're going to do it. Bill, the art director, like Metzen he'd give us his zone ideas. Okay, this is a story zone. Other zones, you guys just make up your own zones, right? And of course, he's talking to the art director. Art director's responsible for the zone vision. So Bill Petrus would paint. He was so good at just whipping up a painting in like 3 hours. He'd have a new zone, and that's kind of how that worked.
So you said like Lower Blackrock's actually supposed to be like a Mines of Moria type thing.
Not supposed to be. That's just where the inspiration came
Oh,
from.
I see.
Like basically, Jeff kind of knew. Jeff Kaplan always knew my enthusiasm. He'd say, "Hey, can you think?" Or I would go to him and say, "Hey, do you want a new dungeon down here? I've got an idea." And Jeff was, we're of the same mind where the answer is always yes. Yes, put more in the game. Yes, always put more in the game, because that's the big worry when you're working on an MMO is if people run out of content, then they stop playing your game, they cancel the subscription, and then, you're done after a year, So that's what we were really, really paranoid when we were building all these huge, huge dungeons is that people would be burned through the content. And then after a year go, well, I don't want to pay for something I'm not playing. There's no content. But no, I went to them with that idea. Say, hey, let's why don't we rubble this stuff out? Because I always wanted to. You can get so much. You could get very organic shapes when we called it rubbling out when you destroy something. And the Dwarven City BRD was really intact, and so is Upper Blackrock Spire. Metzen didn't want a ruined area, so he was really the person that we really had to sell it to. And I think after Fellowship of the Ring, he was like, oh yeah, give me some of that, give me some of that, so
Yeah.
easy sell.
I'm kind of curious, is there anything in the game almost named after you? Like, I know Nat Pagel is named like Pat Nagel,
Pat
right?
Nagel, yeah.
Is there anything like that but for you?
There's something like that for pretty much every single developer that I know of. I'm in the game twice that I know of. Actually, someone just mentioned something else. The children in Stormwind, there's a bunch of them. They were named after the level designers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's Aaron, Cameron, Dana. Now Dana's a guy, and he's actually, and it was the children in Stormwind are the level designers, and I shouldn't say level, the dungeon designers, okay? Because you have to distinguish the interior level designers, which did dungeons, and the exterior level designers, which did a totally different. They had completely different tools. Those were the landscapers, okay? So they did the zones. They worked on the zones. So the interior guys, we were the children in Stormwind, and because we didn't have any girls. We threw in the receptionist Lisa, who hung out with us. She was dating Dana. They're still together, by the way. And Dana, they turned into a girl as well. So there's the guys and Dana and Lisa are the girls. Those are the children that fall around. And I think there's a lot of speculation. I think I talked to the Wowpedia guys when I was ramping up my promotions for my book. They were saying that they were like pumping me for information because this is like a gold mine for Wowpedia.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You've seen the book, right? Okay,
yeah.
So it's just saturated with worthless information. Absolutely worthless information.
My favorite kind.
Yeah, I know. I find it fascinating, and so for 4 years while we were building WoW, I just kept the log. I did it pretty much every month of just all the new things that went into the zone, all the little things observations that I made about how development worked. Every month I made a lot, and that's basically what the WoW diary is. But they saw that and they're like, oh, are they shaped in a pentagram around, one of the, they're walking and there's all kinds of speculation about this evil stuff. And we were troublemakers, okay? Like when we had a tournament. I think we had a Warcraft 3 tournament and we cheated. We just openly cheated. We told everyone on the team that we were cheating except the guys that we were playing. And because I don't know, there's an anecdote about it in the book, but I'm also Jonathan Staats, which is a Worgen in, I believe, Darkshore, that Eric Malouf, I think he's the lead quest designer now. He put him out there. Eric and I are good friends.
So I'm kind of curious about like just Easter eggs. We were mentioning all these little things. Like, is there anything you specifically put into the game or like the dungeons or whatever that's like a little Easter egg or secret that not many people knew about?
Yeah, somebody asked me this on the Reddit WoW AMA. I did an AMA yesterday. Oh my gosh, that's like 6 hours of just probably like 10 hours. It's just straight typing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, there are so many questions people asked. It really went off well, but one question was exactly that, and I'll give the same answer. I carved the word Lisa, because Lisa hung out with us. After work, she'd come out. We'd have lunch brought up or dinner, brought in, and she'd chow down with us. And I carved her name in if you go into the stairs, the entrance. beneath the entrance, there's an area that just I I tessellated the use a fancy word. I tessellated into the surface of one of the walls in the temple part, not in the pit of Ankarash, of the very bottom of the temple part. There's like this stairwell that no one used. I put the word Lisa, and she freaked out. Don't put my name, I'll get in trouble. Don't put my name, I'll get in trouble. I was like, no, it's too late. It's already there, Lisa. Everybody knows, you know. And you can't see it unless you load it into the editor, of course. And I say this on the AMA, and instantly people start loading it from the classic WoW guys.
Oh, yeah.
Those guys are data miners for data miners. Those guys are oh my god, those guys are crazy. And they all have it on their screen. They're like looking for it, and they were looking in the wrong area. But I wonder if they ever found it.
They probably did.
Yeah.
It's crazy the amount of people even data mine, because like, you know, like back in, you know, the older days, it's like nobody data mined or anything. And I think that kind of made it a little more fun, because now something will get posted like, oh, I found the code for it, like this one string of code and everything. But back then it was more like a mysterious thing, so you couldn't really do that.
Yeah, it was. Well, they did it as soon as the thing went beta. I mean, it went immediately, like literally the next night it was on. But it wasn't open. There weren't like, it was like dark web stuff. They were like running away from Blizzard, you know, Vivendi representatives trying to shut them down. You know, it was kind of crazy, but yeah.
I'm kind of curious too, like, how's it feel to run your own dungeons and stuff you design? Is it like a weird feeling to do that, or like have you like gone through it so much it doesn't even feel like you can enjoy it?
Honestly, I'd love to have a different perspective, but when you're playing the game, and even though you're a dev, your eyes are on the prize. You know, you don't care about the dungeon, and nobody cares about the dungeon, and I'm fine with that. You care about the loot. You care about your drop. You're going to the, you know, whatever it is, because you want that drop so bad. And you're almost like, please don't let the group break up before we get to whatever, you know. Boss monster, because I want that drop so bad. So it didn't even matter what dungeon it was. If it was the loot that you cared about, that's what I did. But no, I enjoyed playing all the dungeons pretty much. Didn't enjoy the stockades, but you know, that was like maybe 2 afternoons of work. So.
So I'm curious about with Cataclysm. Were you still on the team in Cataclysm?
Yes, I was. For Cataclysm, I pretty much, because I was the oldest in the dungeon, I did a lot of technical stuff. I'd done so many raids. I'd done every raid. So I can't even remember them all. I think Nax was the last raid that I'd done, and I was happy just fixing stuff. A lot of people weren't building things correctly, and there was a lot of errors. When I left the WoW team, I had fixed more bugs from the Blizzard database. We have this, basically QA is, Blizzard has this awesome QA department. When I left WoW, I had more bugs fixed than any person who had worked at Blizzard before.
Oh, wow.
And it's because I was also fixing a lot of people's other bugs, and probably because dungeon bugs are a lot easier to fix than coding bugs. Coding bugs are pretty nasty, you know, for the most part. So I just had that distinction, you know. And of course, Mike Morheim joked that I'd probably caused more bugs than anybody else on the team. But oh, I'm sorry. What were you asking? Oh yeah, Cataclysm. What I was doing on Cataclysm was technical. I was converting Stormwind into the facade city that it was. You know, it was like a movie set where just the front of the building is there. I had to convert that into a flyable area. So if you're looking down, you see all the rooftops. It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of a mess. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a lot more technical because we didn't want to. I couldn't touch Stormwind, like I couldn't actually budge the city itself because then all the spawns would fall through the floor. Items would especially when there's a holiday, they put candles everywhere. All those candles would have to be replaced. So it was very careful work. I did the same work in the Argent Crusade. There was an arena.
The Argent tournament type.
Yeah,
thing?
the Argent tournament. I built the arena, and that was typical. That was actually that was new too. That was very technical because the arena's floor, we had the ability to turn off collision for the ground, which was groundbreaking for the MMO. It just the way that our monster pathing worked. That was kind of a big thing. So to have the ground disappear was very technical. I was able to do that, but yeah, I moved on to a lot of technical work because I was probably burnt out.
Did it feel weird having like a lot of your old work redesigned or destroyed and like everything in the Cataclysm?
A lot of my work pretty much survived. I'm so glad that the Scott Mercer, he's a lead scripter for the dungeon fights.
Mm-hmm.
He almost apologetically said, "Oh yeah, we got rid of the maze in Wailing Caverns," and I was like, "Yeah, the mushroom maze is gone! Yay!" Oh my god, I hated that. I hated playing through it. I hated building it, but it was just incredible that they just wanted more, bigger, until they realized it was too big. But by then, it's a live server,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were doing armor sets for the Wailing Caverns. That's how far off we were, And I think we only got one armor set. Was it the Druid? Not Druid. The Rogue was the only armor set, I think, for the Wailing Caverns. I can't remember if that's true, but that's how far off our design philosophy had changed. That we were doing armor sets with set bonuses. I mean, it's crazy for level 20.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious too what your favorite boss is for raids, or what your favorite boss area you designed is, because when you design something like Molten Core, where you're like, all right, this is where on a goal mag's gonna go, or did you just design it not knowing who's even gonna be there?
No, I knew that Jeff came in and he asked me. There's a whole story with Molten Core in the book. Is Jeff he asked me, okay, we're not supposed to be doing this, but Scott Mercer he's working on Team 1, so here's possible deniability. We're not doing it. It's just Team 1 is doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So he was doing all the scripting and debugging of the fights and stuff. I, of course, had a license to Ninja, so I could do this in my spare time. I built the Molten Core in it was ridiculous, 2 days. I mean, it's the simplest geometry. I'm almost embarrassed to actually have my name on it. But then once it was approved, then I spent 2 weeks actually making Ragnaros's room somewhat more interesting. I'd put little runes in the ground. I thought those we had these runes, and we had this ability to make a prop activatable. Okay, that's not a word unless you're a developer, but when you can make a activatable object, you can do things with it, and you can incorporate that into the fight. Okay, so the whole thing with the runes, every time you kill a boss monster, you click on the rune, and that actually unlocks apparently Ragnaros.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know, maybe you just do that for fun. But that was just the scripters going, okay, those runes are kind of nice, but we're not going to use them for a boss fight. And that's fine with me, of course. I don't care. But That's just why the runes are there at all. I put them in there in case that they were going to use them. So I was just basically making cool runes, okay? And they would use these areas for boss fights. There was no coordination whatsoever. There is just like, I don't know, like I think I made an ash pit for executives' fight. There was a coal pit. I don't know, what do you call it? Fire pit.
Mm-hmm.
And they teleported people above that fire pit, and it was just, there was a hurt trigger on it that did damage, so you wanted to get off that. So they saw this thing and said, oh, let's just teleport people over that, and that's something that we can do. There's 10, 20, 100 different ways they could have used that fire pit. But that's kind of how we did, because we didn't have enough time to coordinate at all. And I think that's how many of the rooms in, well, pretty much all the dungeons, none of them they were all retrofitted. The fights were always retrofitted in there. I think that was actually, I think that's the best way to do it. Actually, I like retrofitting more than planning. Planning was you just get a little bit too contrived. Like, there's something more creative, I think, with like the Razor Gore fight. Razor Gore, the room just seemed to, we can kite people along these two platforms from end to end. So it's kind of a different thing. But my favorite fight was Baron Geddon. I just like the fight mechanics, the knockback that you could launch yourself at a 45-degree angle was just kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's my favorite fight.
I'm kind of, speaking of like raid fights and stuff, did you design like ICC, or like have a part in ICC and all that, and like the Lich Kings? I know that's one of the most like impactful Warcraft things like in the game.
I did not do Ice Crown Citadel. That was Kevin Griffith. Yeah, that was Kevin Griffith. That was the developer who died from cancer. He's my workout buddy.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, that was the last thing he built for the WoW team. That I pretty much sure that was the big thing of his, and then he moved on to Diablo, and that was his baby for a long time.
I'm kind of curious about with modern WoW. Like Draenor garrisons. Obviously, nobody really likes Draenor garrisons. But I'm curious as to how like that kind of fit in, like versus the old player housing you were thinking about. Like, did any of those ideas transfer over that you're like, oh, this is what it would be like in modern WoW? It'd be like a garrison, or like what you would have changed with garrisons to make it work better. Like, do you ever look at those modern things and be like, oh, if only they would have did this properly?
Not really. I actually don't know how the garrisons work. I'd stopped playing from Cataclysm. The Ice Crown was my last raid, and I just kind of burnt out on World of Warcraft. I kind of, I'd been there and done that so many times. I was ready to move on. But yeah, I actually don't know. And now I'm at the point where my hands, I'm out of computer game development because of my hands. I can't play.
Yeah.
So it's
the arthritis.
like, oh, well, I mean, I suppose I could for a few hours, but if I have to regulate my computer time, it's better spent creating something and paying the bills than playing games.
Yeah. So I was actually looking through some of these questions on the Reddit AMA, and one of them I thought was interesting, which is the Blood Elves and the Draenei being chosen as like playable races.
Oh yeah.
And so, can you talk a bit about that? Because I think you said you even influenced the Draenei dance.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think Dollar Mindy is how you pronounce his name. At least that's how I pronounce it. It's a Pakistani or Indian. I can't remember. He's a pop star, and he has this exuberant dance, Tunuktan, and it's just the craziest dance, and somebody circulated it around the office, on the email thread, And it was just such a crazy video that we just loved it. It was just, wow, it was just so out there that I just had the idea. I was telling Mauricio, who was our animator at the time, that this should be the Draenei dance. Oh, this has got to be the Draenei dance. It's got to be. And see, the thing is that we always wanted to pick the popular, like a recognizable dance. This was really esoteric. I mean, it was really out in the weeds. Okay. But the thing was, the entire team loved this video. and so Mauricio, I could just see him thinking, like, he couldn't stop himself from smiling as he's picturing this crazy dance in the game. And he did it. Yeah, he did it. So I was able to, like, come on, think how good it will be. It'll be so awesome. It'll be so awesome. It's just badgered him until he relented. But yeah. So yeah, the Draenei they were just the Outland. That was the aliens on the other planet, and Blood Elves, we just needed a beautiful race.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah, everyone kind of knew that. Oh yeah, the Horde need a little. They need a little help.
Yeah. What were like some of the other races that were even considered for that?
For Burning Crusade, I don't know. Let's see. We probably thought about goblins. Actually, the first expansion was going to be South Seas. Like South Seas was like just, and I think it's just because when Booty Bay was built, everyone was just so stoked about pirating stuff. The Pirates of the Caribbean was coming out. It just seemed like pirates were just, I don't know, maybe it's a Southern California thing. Like everybody likes the pirates there. So we were going to do that, but and then Naga were going to be playable, but then we realized that Naga, the body type doesn't fit. We can't put them on mounts. The armor doesn't fit on them. So that plus we wanted to figure, the reason I think why we went to Outland was because we needed a new world tab. And that's a technical thing where we couldn't add zones to Azeroth or Kalimdor because there was so much information on those zones. I think we were either waiting for hardware to improve or code to improve. So we just couldn't keep connecting zone after zone. We eventually, like Joe Rumsey was probably saying, hey, we're overloading these zones. We're going to start seeing performance depreciation. So I think that's actually why we did Outland. Although we could have done that with South Seas, it would have been a different world tab too. This would have been islands. So
yeah,
what do I know?
That's like the modern BFA that just came out. That's all South Seas stuff.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's it. Okay. Well, cool.
Yeah, it just took 15 years.
That's how it works.
So I was looking through some more stuff. Like, I'm curious of your favorite zone, not even just like from a design like you designed it perspective, but just like a zone that you love being in. Like I always loved Winter Spring just because it's like snowy, and like I said earlier, like Arathi Highlands just because it's very green and the hills and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm surprised how many people like Winter Spring. It's just, I like it too. I think see, here's the thing. When you're flowing through one zone and another, and this is way out of my wheelhouse. I do dungeons. Like all this stuff, I come off as like an expert only because I've worked with these guys and I'm just like, parroting what I hear.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, let me tell you something. No one came, John, how do we flow the zones together? It wasn't like that. So as I understand it, the way they strung the zones together is that they would want this. We would want to introduce as much variation as possible. So we're not killing boars and bears even the boars and bears were in every single zone. You're not killing the same creature type. We're not killing orcs over and over. We're not killing yetis over and over. We're not killing one creature type over and over. That was also the same with the zones themselves. Like when you have two desert zones together, you're like, oh man, do I want to go to Desolus or do I want want to go to this other green zone. Let's go to the green
Yeah.
zone, you know. And that's kind of like, but for whatever reason, Winter Spring is just, it's so refreshing. I don't know why. I just don't even know why it's such a pleasant zone to. It's often the trees. Like, people appreciate greenery. I think it's. I got my own tinfoil hat theory that the human eye sees more shades of green than any other color. Okay, we're designed for that. You know, biology has designed us for that. So I think that's why we all tend to appreciate the greener zones. But even though Winter Spring's white, you know, I think maybe it's just the color of the trees. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe someone's going to write a paper on that. You know what? I mean, there's certainly a lot of data, that's for sure. You know, if you can.
I think it's even almost like a little serene or like very quiet, because I know like even when it snows in real life, everybody's like, oh, yeah. So, and then I think there's also just a lack of snow zones really in old WoW.
Yeah, I think that might have been it. And honestly, the great thing about Winter Spring is that you feel like you're on your own. Like, no one's, you know, there's no dungeons up there. They're not going to drag you into a dungeon that you don't want to go in. You just chill out. You know, I was one of the exceptions. I actually love the quests where they say, find me 13 candles or 20 pelts. I loved those quests because there's not a lot of quest text to read, and I could just zone out and just kill these, you know, monsters one after another. It's just my brain would be off, you know. And that was just my vacation. You know?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting even with all that, because I guess now they have world quests, so it's like you can just go all over the world and like complete stuff. But I guess questing in general, it used to be more grindy, and now it's kind of, they've learned like how to, I guess, develop questing better. But like, how did that change throughout? Like, was questing even initially part of the plan? Like, all right, we're gonna have people do quests, or was it like strictly grinding?
No, quests were just a navigational issue. That's you were supposed to basically learn how to. Okay, so we didn't want people falling to their death. Okay, another problem with people having in first-person shooters, we were always comparing our game to first-person shooters, is getting lost. Getting lost in a first-person shooter just sucked. Everyone's done it. Everyone's gotten lost in a first-person shooter, and that's something we wanted to avoid, not just with dungeons, but with the zones. So while EverQuest had some quests in it, they didn't actually, I don't think they used them as a navigational aid, because the grind was so long, you're going to live in that zone for forever and ever. So you don't have to worry about going from zone to zone to zone to zone to zone. So in WoW, we wanted people to have a hub where they felt safe, and then familiarize themselves with, oh, this is the lake. Oh, this is the obstacle here. This mountain range looks different from that mountain range. Get their bearings in the zone, so they know. People could always know which way to return to the hub. Okay, because we didn't know if there were going to be features in our mini map that were going to point them to, you know, this is stuff that was kind of coming in later in the game. Like, I mean, the questing now is like they're practically pointing you to the hole in the ground that you need to dig. You know,
big blinking indicator.
Yeah, I know. So it's like the Bugs Bunny where there's a big neon sign pointing. You know, buried treasure here with a big X on the ground. Yeah, so that's what questing was. It was just familiarizing yourself with the way that the mobs attacked, the way that avoid this elite mob here. You know, it just kind of just get you. But that's not how people played. They used quests to level. I think oddly enough, if you made quests give very, very little experience, people would have probably stayed in the zone. They probably wouldn't have thought, oh, I'm supposed to level up by completing quests. You know, that's the way people interpreted quests. But they gave so much experience, especially at the first through fifth level. You do a quest and you immediately jump to the next level. So if they hadn't done that, then they probably wouldn't have made those associations with quests as leveling mechanics.
Huh.
And there probably wouldn't have been as many quests because we only added more quests because people would just go to zones, just try to fill up their quest book.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, who knows?
Yeah, and I think it's crazy how much everything shifted even, because I remember back then where I think everybody starts out in the game, you just start killing stuff because you don't even know what you're doing. Because I know there were the quests, but I was like, oh, I don't know what that is, and you just wander off and start exploring and killing.
Yeah.
And now they more so kind of direct you, like you said, towards the, like, here's where you start, click the quest guy.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. Like I once had an illustration professor in college. He would teach you to push something. Like if you're drawing something, like if you're doing something artistically, push it until it breaks, okay? And then pull back just a little bit. That's the sweet zone. Okay, that's where you want to be. But keep pushing it until it just breaks. And I think I see that mechanic. They've done it in WoW where they say, "Oh, this is a time saving mechanic. We'll teleport you there, and they've pushed it in past expansions to the point where there's no world in World of Warcraft. You just jump in and do the event or thing that they, and I as I understand it, they've backed away from that.
Yeah.
Somewhat. I don't know what it's like in BFA, but yeah, and MMOs, you're judging the people behave in MMOs differently today than they do when WoW first shipped. It's not the same audience. The audience is smarter. Their behavior changes because they're smarter. So the game has to change because they're smarter.
Yep.
And, now that the game has changed, they'll adjust their behavior differently. And now the game is going to change. It's just this weird evolution of leapfrog evolution kind of developer, player.
Yeah, I mean, I think Warlords of Draenor was the most don't go into the world, stay here. That's pretty much what a garrison was. It was like, you can do everything in your garrison. And it was like, well, I don't want to do everything in my garrison. I want to go out into the world. That's the whole point of the MMO RPG,
Yeah, and that's kind of the conclusion that we had with player housing when we were talking about it on WoW, is that once you have a redundant system, it doesn't give players a choice. What it does, players will always choose the path of least resistance. I mean, that's just classic, but it actually makes the other content obsolete. Like you feel bad actually doing it just because there's some worm in your brain telling you're falling further behind. People are outdoing you. It's just this crazy imagined negative reinforcement that you really can't duplicate content. And that's why we just never moved forward with player housing. Yeah, we could bribe people to play, bribe them to level up their house and, do all this stuff. But, and I've never played Garrison, so I actually don't even know how it works. So,
yeah, it's,
I can't comment on it too much, but
it's pretty much like you would be able to do a lot of professions in your garrison. You could do quests in your garrison. But the big thing was, like, you could send off AI things. It was essentially like a mobile game style of thing where you'd send off people, you'd wait a certain amount of time, you'd come back, you'd collect stuff. And so it's still in the game, but it's like so far removed. Like, it's just a little side thing to get some extra rep or gold or stuff like that because they realized how bad it was. But because of that, now they're doing a lot better. And I think the game's returning to what it was.
Yeah. And that's you push it too far until it breaks. You pull back, and now they're in the sweet zone. That's the great thing about WoW. I mean, I end my book like, it's kind of funny. I end my book. I get a little misty-eyed at the end of the book where I talk about how the developers today are. They're making their own game, and that's the way it
Mhm.
should be. It's not like there's nothing at all is written in stone, and that's basically kind of how Blizzard's philosophy is, not just with game design, but just how to run the company, how to structure development teams, how to do, that's there's no one vision that the company is based off. It's kind of cool that they'll always be able to be in a position where they can learn from their mistakes.
Mhm.
Just a great way to run the company, but that's how the team, that's development. You're constantly learning as you're going. You're improvising.
Um, so the last thing I want to ask you is pretty much like your opinions or what you think of them remaking classic or vanilla WoW at this point. Like, do you think that's cool that they're doing it and they're bringing it back, or do you not really care because you don't play anymore?
Oh no, no, no. I'm amazed that they made that announcement. I'm really surprised just because I don't have a vision of what it could possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just don't know how they could possibly do it. Like, it sounds so ambitious to have a parallel game. I just don't even know what to compare it to. Like, it's just so it's out there. Like, yeah, it's kind of cool. But if anybody can do it, WoW or Blizzard will be able to. But it's I don't know if it sounds like a fun project to work on. I wouldn't want to rebuild something that even if I were, I mean, even rebuilding my own stuff, and it's kind of funny. I don't even think of it as my own stuff. It's just
Yeah.
stuff that I've been there and I've done that. There's nothing. It's kind of not even artistic because I'm walking in my own footsteps or somebody else's footsteps. It just doesn't sound like a creative endeavor to me.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge I think that they're going to have, is hiring the developers who want to do that. But maybe there's some twist that they're going to put on stuff. But I don't know. I just think if you're going to make, to me, while WoW Classic means like a more hardcore, slower leveling curve, that I think is what they should go toward. I think that's what that audience wants.
Yeah.
But I
Like
don't.
the old school RPG.
Yeah, but I'm not in that audience. I can only
Yeah.
speculate. So I'm really on the. I don't know anybody in it. Believe me, I don't know any inside information.
Yeah.
I have speculation that is very educated speculation, but yeah, I don't know. Well, and frankly, one of the things I iterate in my book is I repeat over and over is that unless you're actually in the room in the meeting where these decisions are made, you have no idea why they're doing this or why they're doing that. It's just you're a blind man feeling an elephant.
Mm.
It's complete speculation because the guys in the room who are in the meeting, they're working with all the pieces to the puzzle. Okay, then the developers who are actually in other departments, they're seeing maybe half of the pieces of the puzzle. And then there's the other development teams, they see maybe a fourth of the pieces of the puzzle. And by the time you are outside of uh, I don't know, journalism, outside, like when you're a fan, like you're only looking at the finished products, you're looking at a couple pieces of the puzzle and trying to bridge these connections between things that really aren't there at all.
Yeah.
It's that was probably the reason why I wrote my book, is because I just couldn't believe that everything that I thought game development it was Blizzard does, they do things differently, and they do things differently for very good reasons. But yeah,
Well,
it's
like you said, with like you don't know anything unless you were there. It's almost like the Ironforge airfields. Like I was mentioning, there's people like, oh man, they could have been trying to implement flight back then. They could have
oh
been doing
yeah.
this or that, and really, it's just like, oh, he just put it there just because he thought it looked cool.
Yeah, it's really like someone said. It's funny. Like once, oh geez, it bounced between the graphics programmer and the tools programmer a number of times. Tim Truesdale and David Ray, and I think Joe Rumsey. They made a tool that took a picture of the terrain, okay, and the terrain textures. And that's actually what they used for the mini maps, okay. Eventually, it took pictures of like world map objects, like dungeons and buildings and stuff. But that's what the mini map is made of, and you can make satellite pictures. Actually, I think David Ray just started just for fun. He used to work at NASA. He started making satellite pictures just because it was cool. And then people realized, oh shoot, we can make actually real maps with this. And so we started looking at the transitions between one zone and another. Like as a player, you could walk up to the edge of this mountain and you can't see over the mountain. Okay, that's like, okay, that's fine. And say you're in Ungoro to Silithus, okay? And then you're in Silithus, you walk up to this, just walk to this wall of rock, okay? This just sheer, and you can't see over the wall, and that's fine, okay? The rest of the zone looks good. But between Silithus and Ungoro, there's just patches of like boxy, it's almost like, it's hard to describe, like a boxy texture, like these strips of black or strips of white or and the satellite image thing would take pictures of that, and we'd go, oh, that's pretty ugly. What if anybody ever gets up there, like on a griffin? Like, so there was actually a effort made at the end of the game to clean up all these unplayable spaces between the zones because they looked so bad, because no one ever looked at them. I mean, no one had ever looked at them in some instances. Like no human eyes had seen them. So some of them were really bad looking, and we were just really worried that, well, what if people, these guys, they're ninjas. They get everywhere. They'll figure out ways to get past things. So that is probably where that airfield came from. Just someone saw this strip and there was a flight path nearby, and they said, well, this will be kind of funny. We'll see what people come up with. I think there's in Moonglade, I was a druid, so the flight path to Moonglade, I think that's the name of the zone, the druid zone.
Moonglade.
Yeah. Yep. There was a flight path, crazy flight path. I think it was like a 9-minute flight in vanilla. It was, we played out 9 minutes. That was nothing back in EverQuest, but 9 minutes was, they would take you past a troll village. These troll village, they're dancing. There's a big party going on.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's, people come up with their theories, but yeah, it's just fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's about all I got. So thank you for joining me. And I know you've been promoting your book and everything. So if you want to hear more, where can people go to check out your Kickstarter for this book and pretty much everything about it? Because I know there's like so many cool old pictures in it and as well, because I was looking through it and everything.
Yeah. Let's see. The Kickstarter is on Kickstarter. I don't know how to just look for the WoW Diary on Kickstarter. Or you could go to my webpage, whenitsready.com. There's links to it, to the Kickstarter. Also, I've got promotional articles and all kinds of that stuff. I've got a Twitter feed that I'm kicking out twice a day. I'm kicking out some quotes from the diary. There's excerpts and PDFs floating around. So just check out the WoW Diary. It should be pretty findable. It's going to be out till... I actually don't know when the Kickstarter ends. It started yesterday. And it goes on for 4 weeks exactly. So for 28 days, the Kickstarter goes on, and it's going really well, and I'm happy with it. People are like really starting to dig what they see. So, whew.
Awesome. I mean, I'll put all the links to everything below, so it's easy to find. For all the lazy people out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and thanks for having me, Crendor. This is a lot of fun. I miss Booty Bay.
Yeah, it's great talking to you. I learned a lot about things that I didn't really think I wanted to know about.
Now you have more useless information to
I mean,
move forward in your life with. Yes.
I do an entire series called Pointless Top 10 where I find like really useless things in WoW. And there's some very useless, but some of them are, I always say, inside pointless things are treasure. Because there's that statue in Booty Bay, and I'm like, oh, this is a pointless statue, but if you look in it, there's like a bunch of treasure in it. So I've always had that as my little motto for it.
Oh, that's funny. No, actually, like I think the book actually has a lot of information. It's like I couldn't really write this while I was in the industry because I think it would be too self-promotional.
Yeah.
But I'm nowhere near. I'm not doing the computer. I'm more tabletop now. So I felt a lot more comfortable writing this, and it's really, we've all seen the merchandise books, gorgeous, books. This is this is a book that is unlike any other book you've ever seen about computer games. I can tell you that. It's the fact that Blizzard gave me a license to use their images. These are images that you probably haven't seen before. Some of them are floating around the net. A lot of them came from my compilation of my artwork that I've been kept, but they're mostly like screenshots that I took, like all the hairy, ugly stuff of the game. That's what the book's about, and I think it's very educational. So,
yeah, and I know there's a big market for people just wanting more WoW knowledge, so I think that's
yeah. Well, okay, it's got a lot of that too. But, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And yeah, I never know how to end these, so I'm just going to end it right here.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
See ya.